Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
Tommy Dweakuil an Overshaw Flagan in you Tushkawil She Pronach. For decades we know that the Moore Street site has been allowed to fall into neglect and into dereliction. And it's embarrassing, and it's particularly embarrassing with the centenary coming up next year. 14 to 17 has been designated a national monument. Now there's a figure of 5 million floating around, but we're just wondering who exactly costed the 14 to 17 buildings. 14 to 17 is part of what the National Museum has called a battlefield site. It's our Gettysburg, it's our Alamo. Because apart from the fact that the men and women from the GPO evacuated to those houses, and it was the scene where they discussed the surrender, the streets around there also saw the deaths of up to 2,000 people. So there are stories on Henry Street, Henry Place, Moore Lane, Moore Street, and the renamed O'Rahilly Parade. So it's all a battlefield site. Over the past few months, over 10,000 signatures have been collected by volunteers every Saturday on Moore Street to save Moore Street. And these are ordinary Dubs and other people who come in to shop in Moore Street because they don't want to see this place with its rich culture and its rich history to be extinguished. And it is in very real danger now. The late Eamon McLellan had a great image that he used. He said, "Me jewel, me darling, Moore Street." I don't think he had it in mind that Project Jewel would become part of selling off the whole area, lock, stock and barrel. Even though the area is designated one of special planning control and much of it included as an architectural conservation area, there's a real danger now of the site being sold off to sovereign firms from the Middle East, from the Far East, from wherever, because there's a lot of confidence that the sale will be of interest to the Blackstones of this world who have been buying up a range of distressed properties. Now, our group, as Deputy McLellan said, we handed in a letter to the Taoiseach. There are copies to all of the ministers, and my question is what responsibility is the government going to take now for this national monument site and the battlefield site? Because you are the guardians of our national monuments.
Thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan. Minister, you have 4 minutes for a reply.
Thanks, Cahirdich. I'm aware of reports that NAMA is seeking buyers for the loans it holds in relation to the commercial entity that owns the Dublin Central Development Site that includes the National Monument of numbers 14 to 17 Moore Street. Contrary to the impression being created by some of these reports, the fact of the matter is that it is loans and not properties that NAMA is seeking expressions of interest for. I am concerned that an entirely false picture is being painted about the sale of the National Monument itself. It is being sold. However, the buyer is the state, and not some banker or venture capitalist. The state which will safeguard it and restore it back to how it was in 1916, the state which will develop a 1916 commemorative centre on the site as a solemn and fitting tribute to the 1916 leaders who held their final War Council meeting there. That decision by the government was made in order to bring the National Monument into public ownership, to secure its long-term future, to complete the development of the proposed 1916 commemorative centre as quickly as possible. The government's decision will not in any way be affected, delayed or otherwise impinged upon by any disposal of NAMA loan books. The National Monument site is being removed from the NAMA portfolio sale. As part of the transfer of ownership to the sale to the state, all loans will be discharged over the monument site, and all necessary licences and wayleaves will be put in place in order to carry out the National Monument works. I want to make it clear as I possibly can, in the hope that it will dispel the attempt at confusion and uncertainty that has always been the hallmark of certain parties who seem to be more anxious for nothing to happen than to see the monument properly restored and open to the public. At the risk of repeating myself, the position is that the acquisition of numbers 14 to 17 Moore Street by the Minister for Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht on behalf of the State is in progress and will, I expect, be completed shortly. What's more, the Minister has made it clear in this House in the last 2 weeks in answer to several parliamentary questions from Deputy McLellan. This is the clearest possible demonstration of the Government's commitment to acknowledge and mark the historical importance of the site in a positive and substantive way, and to guarantee, secure and safeguard the long-term future of this historical landmark. The Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht are actively engaged with the monument owners and other relevant parties to conclude the transfer of the property into state ownership as quickly as possible. This process is moving ahead and is nearing completion. In common parlance, the sale is agreed. The Minister is always looking at the best way to restore the buildings in order for the commemorative centre, the plans for which are being developed in consultation with the 1916 Relatives Association, to open at the earliest possible date. The Minister has informed the House on innumerable occasions that her functions in this case arise from the preservation order that was placed on numbers 14 to 17 Moore Street under the National Monuments Act in 2007, with the objective of protecting number 16 as the site of the final Council of War and final headquarters of the leaders of the 1916 Rising. The acquisition and restoration of the monument buildings by the State for the people of Ireland is the clearest possible statement of how seriously the Government has taken that objective. The commemorative centre to be housed in the restored monument buildings will be developed and run as a public facility. It will enhance and complement the 1916 visitor facility currently being developed in the GPO, from where the insurgents retreated to the Moore Street buildings. I look forward to it being completed, and to seeing the public going through the doors in the centenary year of the most momentous event in our country's history.
Thank you, Minister. Deputies, you have 2 minutes for a supplementary statement.
One, I think, is it?
One each.
1 minute, is it?
One each, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'd like to thank the Minister for his response, and I welcome his response, and he's made it clear that the National Monument is not part of Project Jewel. But I would still have concerns around the sale, that the implication of future works would have in regard to the surrounding areas. I'm also glad that you've confirmed that the purchase of the National Monument by the State is nearing completion, and I hope that we will have that completion date quite soon. 2016 is fast approaching, and the National Monuments number 14 to 17 Moore Street and surrounding areas have been an issue in this chamber as long as I've been elected, and probably well beyond that, or well before that time. But the National Monument is a derelict site, and I believe it's a national disgrace. The Minister is guardian of the monument, and it's up to her to protect it. Regarding the €5 million, Minister, when and how will that be spent? Have the building structures and newly discovered cellars of the National Monument been surveyed by suitably qualified experts? If not, when will that happen? Has consideration been given to extending the National Monument protection to other 1916 buildings and structures identified by Frank Miles Shaffery battlefield report as having direct links to the Rising? And Minister, finally, do you believe any restoration work will take place prior to 2016, or will we be still looking at a derelict site?
Deputy McLellan. Deputy O'Sullivan.
Right. Thank you for the reply. I think there is a need for more clarification around this €5 million and how exactly the restoration of 14 to 17 is going to be funded. The signatures that I mentioned, over 10,000, are about saving Moore Street, not just 14 to 17, because it has been described as a battlefield site. I mentioned the other stories there. The Taoiseach described the area as the lanes of history. So the rest of the site on Moore Street is also of great importance, and there is massive potential there for a real historical and cultural quarter that would link up between the GPO, around to Moore Street, onto the rotunda where the surrender actually was, Parnell Monument where the men lined up while they were waiting to be moved up to Richmond Barracks, Kilmainham Jail, and then back down to the North Wall Quay to be taken off to the camps in Frongog. We still have no independent survey of the site. Our group in the Dáil here asked for a meeting with NAMA. Deputy Wallace was told to go to NAMA with his issues, and yet we couldn't get a meeting with NAMA to address these particular issues. But I come back to it, the site, the battlefield site, which is not covered in your answer.
The Minister, you have 2 minutes for a concluding statement.
Okay, I just want to emphasise the Minister has no function in relation to the operations of NAMA and has no role in relation to any disposal of NAMA loans or indeed assets in its purview. The Minister's involvement in Moore Street, as she has made clear on countless occasions, arises from the preservation order that was placed in numbers 14 to 17 under the National Monuments Act in 2007. Any plans or proposals for the wider area outside of the confines of the National Monument are the responsibility of Dublin City Council as the planning authority. Redevelopment plans for the area have received full planning permission from An Bord Pleanála. The properties around the National Monument are in private ownership. They are not subject to the Minister's remit under the National Monument Acts. The historical significance of the fundamentally intact building at number 16 as the final headquarters of the 1916 Rising was a determining factor in the decision to make that preservation order. And these are the only substantially authentic, original, intact and pre-1916 buildings in the street. They're the only ones that retain significant original elements that would have been there in 1916, including staircases, partitions, plasterwork, doors, floors, fittings and fixtures. And above all, number 14 to 17 also contain the physical evidence of the presence of the insurgents in the form of the openings broken through party walls as they tunnelled their way up the street. All of these elements are being retained, are being secured and are being permanently safeguarded to the Government's decision to assume ownership of the National Monument. The Minister is pressing ahead as speedily as possible to acquire the site, to carry out the restoration work and to have the 1916 commemorative centre open to the public as speedily as possible. I wish I had a better timeline for you, Deputies, but I don't. I look forward to the day work gets started on the Moore Street project. It's a day when it opens its doors to welcome the public, and it's a day when it becomes something that all of our citizens can look forward to with pride as a fitting testament to the men and women of 1916 and what they fought for. There are more good discussions to be had, not least with the traders who occupy that street and doing their daily business. But subject to agreement, we do hope to have what I can only call a wrap going around those four buildings in the very near future to give a solid indication of the intention of government to move and to establish a lasting monument to the sacrifices of those who fought that week and who had their final meetings in the historic building.